My mother texted me on a Tuesday evening at exactly 7:14. The message glaring on my phone screen was vicious, calculated, and direct. She wrote, "You are cut off. Do not contact this family again." I was sitting in the quiet luxury of my Manhattan penthouse listening to the faint, steady hum of the city below and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my red wine. I stared at the harsh words that were meant to completely destroy my world, words designed to send me into a spiral of panic and begging. But I did not panic. I simply replied, "Okay." Then I set my phone face down on the marble counter and I made my move. I opened my laptop and logged into my private banking portal. With a few swift keystrokes, I disabled the 3 platinum credit cards my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law had been using as their personal piggy banks for years. I watched the status bars turn from active to terminated. I revoked their access to the discretionary funds that financed their luxury cars and designer wardrobes. Then I emailed my corporate lawyer with one simple directive. I told him to immediately pull the financial backing on their precious new $2 million real estate venture and to begin the immediate dissolution of the shell corporation that funded their entire lifestyle. I closed my laptop, poured myself another glass of wine, and enjoyed the most peaceful night of sleep I had experienced in a decade. 2 days later, the absolute silence was shattered. My phone lit up with 58 missed calls in the span of 3 hours. The notifications flooded my screen in a relentless wave of panic. My voicemail inbox filled to maximum capacity with hysterical, screaming messages. My email chimed with an urgent, frantic message from their personal attorney stating, "We have a serious problem. The accounts are frozen and the house closing is canceled." They were experiencing a complete financial freefall, and they had absolutely no idea that the daughter they had just confidently banished from the family was the only reason they had a single dime to their name. They thought they were punishing me. They thought they were teaching me a lesson about respect and hierarchy. They did not realize they had just severed their own life support. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old and a director at a top-tier private equity firm in New York City. I specialize in identifying bad investments, restructuring toxic assets, and liquidating liabilities. For years, I failed to apply those exact same professional principles to my own family. Before I tell you exactly how my mother's obsession with high society status led to her absolute ruin with a single text message, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to teach toxic relatives a lesson they will never forget, or if you know exactly what it feels like to be the scapegoat in a family that cares infinitely more about appearances than actual unconditional love. I have spent my entire life operating in the shadows of a family that demanded absolute perfection while offering absolutely nothing in return. My mother Beatrice is a woman who feeds on control and social dominance. At 58 years old, she has spent decades curating a flawless image for her country club friends and her church congregation. She walks through the affluent suburbs of Atlanta, wearing designer clothes paid for by invisible money, demanding respect from everyone she encounters. She thrives on the illusion of Black excellence, presenting our family as a dynasty of generational wealth and unparalleled success. But an illusion is all it ever was, a fragile house of cards built on a foundation of lies, entitlement, and my quiet, unacknowledged financial sacrifices. For as long as I can remember, I was the outsider. I was the dark-skinned, serious, analytical daughter who refused to play the political games required to climb the social ladder. I preferred reading financial reports over attending lavish galas. I chose to build a career in the grueling world of investment banking instead of hunting for a wealthy husband to elevate my status. Because I chose independence, I was branded as the difficult child. I was the target of relentless criticism, subtle mockery, and public humiliation. My mother made sure I knew my place. She made sure I knew that no matter how many millions I managed at work, I would never be as valuable, as beautiful, or as worthy of love as my younger sister. My sister Jasmine is the undisputed golden child. She is 29 years old, bubbly, superficial, and perfectly compliant with my mother's grand vision. Jasmine has never held a stable job, but she is an expert at spending money she did not earn. She married Trevor, a 31-year-old finance bro who embodies everything toxic about corporate privilege. Trevor speaks in aggressive investment jargon, constantly belittling my intelligence and treating me like an incompetent subordinate. He acts as the man of the house, basking in my mother's adoration, while secretly relying on the very funds I secretly provided. Together, the three of them formed an impenetrable alliance of arrogance and greed. They built their entire reality around a mythical family trust, a supposedly bottomless pit of money left behind by my late grandfather. My mother acted as the grand matriarch, the honorable manager of this vast fortune, using it to control Jasmine and Trevor with promises of inheritances and down payments. What they did not know, what they could not possibly comprehend, as they sat in their luxury cars and dined at five-star restaurants, was that the family trust went bankrupt 8 years ago. The money they were so proudly spending was mine. Every vacation, every designer handbag, every mortgage payment came directly from the grueling 80-hour work weeks I endured in New York. I was their silent benefactor, enduring their abuse while funding their elite lifestyle out of a misplaced toxic sense of familial duty. So when my phone vibrated on that rainy Tuesday evening and I read the words, "You are cut off," the irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. My mother believed she was wielding the ultimate weapon. She believed that by threatening to cut my access to the imaginary family trust, I would crumble. She expected me to respond with paragraphs of desperate apologies. She expected me to beg for her forgiveness, to plead for my rightful place in the family hierarchy. She wanted to remind me that I was nothing without her wealth and her approval. Instead, reading that message was the most liberating moment of my entire existence. The heavy, invisible chains of guilt and obligation snapped instantly. I realized I was no longer required to endure their psychological abuse just to keep the family intact. I was no longer obligated to finance my own disrespect. She had officially released me, and by releasing me, she had unknowingly authorized her own immediate financial destruction. The 58 missed calls and the frantic emails from their lawyer were just the opening act of the absolute chaos they had brought upon themselves. I am finally ready to tell you exactly how it all went down, step by step, dollar by dollar. To understand how we reached that point of absolute financial warfare, we have to go back to 3 days before my mother sent that fatal text message. It was a crisp, quiet Sunday afternoon in Manhattan. I was sitting on my custom velvet sofa, the camera tracking the slow, rhythmic movement of my fingers as I glided across the screen of my iPad. The lens tilted slightly from a low angle, framing me against the towering glass walls of my living room, capturing a sense of absolute calm and unshakable authority. I was reviewing a series of corporate restructuring portfolios, enjoying the silence when my phone began to vibrate violently on the marble coffee table. It was the family group chat, a digital circus, that my mother had pretentiously named Blessed and Highly Favored. Jasmine had entered the chat, and she did not just send a message, she flooded it. 20 high-resolution photos materialized on the screen, one after another. It was a sprawling European provincial estate located in Buckhead, the most expensive and exclusive zip code in Atlanta. The property was ostentatious, featuring white limestone columns, a massive cobblestone driveway with a tiered fountain and a manicured lawn that looked like it required a full-time staff to maintain. Jasmine's text messages followed the images in a rapid, breathless sequence, written entirely in capital letters with rows of exclamation points. She typed, "It is finally official. Trevor and I just went under contract for our absolute dream home, $2 million of pure luxury. Mom is already picking out the wallpaper for the grandkids' playroom. Trevor's new position on the senior executive track means we finally have the space that reflects our true standing in the community." For the next 10 minutes, I watched the screen as my mother and Jasmine exchanged mutual adoration. My mother typed essays about how proud she was, how Jasmine was fulfilling the family legacy of elegance, and how my late grandfather would be looking down from heaven with pride at their magnificent success. Jasmine preened under the praise, sending photos of the grand dual staircase, the limestone fireplaces, and the temperature-controlled wine cellar. She was holding court painting a picture of absolute perfection for the entire extended family to see. Then, exactly as I knew she would, Jasmine pivoted. The bragging stopped and the trap was sprung. She sent a text that was casual, breezy, and dripping with an unbelievable amount of entitlement. She wrote, "Nia, there is just one tiny little logistical detail we need you to handle for us. The escrow deposit of $200,000 is due to the title company by tomorrow morning at 10. Trevor's hedge fund portfolios and our high-yield offshore investments are temporarily locked in a strict asset maturity cycle for the next quarter, so we are a little short on liquid cash today. Since you are single, live in a rented apartment, and do not have a real family or children to support, we know this is pocket change for you. Go ahead and wire the $200,000 to the escrow account right now. I will text you the routing numbers. Consider it your contribution to your niece and nephew's future." I sat perfectly still, the camera holding a tight, steady shot on my face as my expression remained entirely unreadable. The sheer, unadulterated delusion of her demand was breathtaking. She did not ask if I was able to help. She did not ask if it was a good time. She demanded it as if my bank account was an extension of her own wallet, framing her financial reckless behavior as my familial obligation. Before I could even process the audacity of her text, Trevor chimed in. He typed a massive multi-paragraph block of text, using every pseudo-intellectual corporate buzzword he could muster to assert his dominance. He wrote, "Nia, look at this from a macroeconomic perspective. Gifting us the cash for the equity deposit is actually an incredibly strategic move for your current tax bracket. It minimizes your liquidity exposure and offsets your capital gains liabilities for the fiscal year. Do not worry about the details. I have already instructed our real estate attorney to draft a standard intrafamily gift letter. I will handle all the paperwork from my end so you do not have to stress your pretty little head over the complicated legalities. Just get the wire transfer executed before the banking sector closes today." I let out a soft, cold laugh that did not reach my eyes. To the audience watching, I explained the reality behind their elaborate lies. Jasmine did not have an investment portfolio. Trevor's high-yield offshore accounts were a complete fiction. What investments tied up actually meant in their world was that Jasmine's personal checking account was dangerously overdrawn. Trevor's luxury car leases were single-handedly draining his monthly salary, and their designer lifestyles were built entirely on a mountain of maxed-out store cards and high-interest consumer debt. They were drowning in their own vanity, and they expected me to drown with them. I tapped the screen of my iPad, the low-angle camera catching the sharp, lethal focus in my eyes, as I prepared my response. I had spent 8 years playing the role of the quiet provider, swallowing my pride and funding their delusions just to keep my mother happy. But the era of compliance ended on that Sunday afternoon. I typed my response directly into the group chat, ensuring every single family member could see the receipts. I wrote, "Huey, congratulations on finding a house you like. However, let us clarify a few facts. I am a private equity director, Trevor, so please spare me the amateur lecture on tax brackets and capital gains. I know exactly how my liabilities work. More importantly, I am not a clearinghouse for your bad financial decisions. I will not be wiring $200,000 to your escrow account today, tomorrow, or ever. If your mythical investments are tied up, I suggest you cancel the contract and wait until they mature before purchasing an estate you clearly cannot afford on your own." The group chat went dead silent. The typing indicators vanished. I had shattered the golden rule of our family dynamic. I had refused to participate in the lie. Jasmine was the first to break the silence, her text messages returning with a vicious, unhinged energy. The superficial sweetness completely disappeared. She typed, "Nia, how can you be so incredibly cold and cruel? You are hoarding millions of dollars in New York, while your own flesh and blood is struggling to secure a home for your niece and nephew. You have always been jealous of me. You are bitter because I have a beautiful marriage and a real family, while you have nothing but a corporate title and a lonely penthouse. Family is supposed to offer unconditional support, but you just want to keep score and throw past favors in my face. You are disgusting. Trevor jumped in right behind her, his tone shifting from patronizing to overtly threatening. He typed, Nia, your unprofessional emotional outbursts are causing severe psychological distress to my pregnant wife. Your sudden refusal to honor your verbal financial commitments to this family is a direct breach of trust. I am well connected with several prominent estate attorneys in Atlanta, and I suggest you think very carefully about the legal ramifications of withholding funds that belong to the family estate. You are violating the implicit structure of our arrangement. I smiled, my thumbs flying across the screen as I delivered a line-by-line liquidation of his entire ego. I texted back, Jasmine, family is indeed about support, which is why I quietly paid $50,000 for your wedding 2 years ago, a loan that remains entirely unpaid. I also pay the $5,000 monthly lease on the BMW you drive, and I clear the balances on the supplemental credit cards you use for your shopping sprees. As for you, Trevor, please do not make me laugh with your legal threats. You do not have an estate attorney because you do not have an estate. Your firm is facing an internal audit for compliance failures, and your personal credit is so leveraged you could not qualify for a mortgage on a lawnmower, let alone a $2 million mansion. The only implicit arrangement here is that you two have been parasites feeding on my hard work. The host is full Trevor. Find another target. The group chat erupted into absolute chaos. Jasmine was typing. Trevor was typing the notification, pings echoing through my quiet apartment like gunfire. They were cornered, exposed, and absolutely frantic as the Friday closing deadline loomed over their heads. And then suddenly, the typing indicators froze entirely. The screen stopped scrolling and a single notification appeared at the top of my phone indicating that my mother, Beatrice, had just entered the chat. The camera shifted, mounted on a slow dolly track, gliding sideways across my living room in a smooth, continuous crab shot. It tracked my exact movements, locking onto my face as my eyes followed the glowing screen of my iPad. I was not angry. I was not crying. I simply watched the typing indicator pulse with a detached clinical fascination. My mother Beatrice was preparing her response, and I knew exactly what kind of psychological warfare she was about to unleash. The first message landed like a digital slap across the face. I read her words out loud, my voice echoing through the quiet luxury of my penthouse. She wrote, Nia, the sheer audacity and utter disrespect you are displaying right now is a disgrace to the way I raised you. You have completely lost your mind. How dare you speak to your sister and your brother-in-law with such vulgar hostility? They are building a legacy. They are securing a future for my grandchildren, and you are trying to sabotage their joy out of pure, unadulterated bitterness. I did not blink. I stared right into the lens of the camera as it slowly moved alongside me. My mother has always weaponized my independence. In her twisted reality, my refusal to cater to her demands was a symptom of jealousy. She could never accept that my lack of a husband was a choice, not a failure. A second paragraph materialized on the screen, longer and more vicious than the first. I continued reading aloud, my tone dripping with absolute disdain. She wrote, You sit up there in New York, hoarding your money, because your masculine, aggressive energy drives every decent man away. Jasmine found a highly successful, educated man who elevates our family standing in the community. Trevor is a blessing to this family. You are just threatened by his financial literacy. You have allowed your little corporate title to make you arrogant, cold, and entirely unlovable. That was the crux of the issue. Trevor was the ultimate prize in my mother's eyes. To Beatrice, a white son-in-law working in finance was the crown jewel of her social integration. She paraded him around her sorority luncheons and charity galas like a trophy. The fact that I, her dark-skinned, fiercely independent daughter, had just exposed her prized son-in-law as a financially illiterate fraud was an unforgivable sin. She had to crush me. She had to restore the hierarchy, not just to protect Jasmine, but to protect the illusion she had sold to Trevor. Trevor married into our family believing he was marrying into deep generational wealth. If my mother admitted that I was the one paying for his wife's luxury vehicle and clearing her credit cards, Trevor would realize he had married into a mirage. The screen lit up again. My mother issued her royal decree. She typed, "You will execute the wire transfer for the $200,000 by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. You will immediately issue a formal apology to Trevor for your slanderous, baseless lies regarding his firm and his credit. If you ever disrespect the hierarchy of this family again, there will be severe consequences. Do not test me, Nia. I am the matriarch of this family and you will fall in line." The camera stopped gliding for a fraction of a second, framing my face perfectly as I let out a sharp, humorless exhale. I tapped the screen and typed my final response to her demands. I wrote, "There will be no wire transfer. There will be no apology. If they need $200,000 by tomorrow, I suggest you sell the luxury vehicles I pay the leases on, or they can simply lose the house. I am done funding this absolute circus. Do not contact me asking for money again." I hit send. I knew exactly what that message would do to her. I had publicly stripped her of her power in front of her golden child and her son-in-law. I had exposed the fact that the matriarch was nothing more than a figurehead. The typing indicator on my mother's end began flashing erratically. She was losing her mind. For 32 years, she had relied on my silent compliance. She had trained me to take the abuse to swallow my pride and to keep writing the checks just to maintain the peace. She thought my need for her maternal approval would always outweigh my self-respect. Her final barrage of texts arrived in rapid succession. I read them aloud, my eyes tracking the text, savoring the desperation hiding behind her cruel words. She typed, "You ungrateful, pathetic child. You think your little Wall Street salary makes you a god. You are nothing without the foundation I built for you. You are an embarrassment to the family name. I have bent over backwards to include you in our lives despite your miserable attitude." Then came the ultimate threat, the weapon she always kept holstered for moments of absolute crisis. She genuinely believed that banishing me from the family would bring me to my knees. She typed the final decisive message. "You are cut off. Do not contact this family again. Do not show your face at Thanksgiving. Do not call your sister. You are officially removed from the family trust. I will be contacting our estate lawyer in the morning to ensure you do not receive a single dime of the family fortune when I am gone. You are dead to us until you are ready to crawl back and beg for my forgiveness." The camera continued its slow sideways glide, pulling back just enough to show my relaxed posture. My mother had just threatened to cut me out of a family trust that had been bankrupt for 8 years. She threatened to cut me out of a fortune that I was personally funding out of my own checking account. She thought she was throwing me out into the cold, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the one paying the heating bill. She had demanded that I not contact them again. She had officially given me the exact permission I needed to stop carrying their dead weight. I did not shed a single tear. I did not type out a frantic apology or beg for a second chance. Instead, I set my phone face up on the marble coffee table and let the silence wash over me. The camera began a smooth, continuous orbit around my living room, circling me like a predator assessing its territory. The rotating shot captured the sharp, unyielding focus in my eyes, matching the sudden, lethal acceleration of my heartbeat. My mother had just declared war, but she had brought a plastic knife to a nuclear launch site. It was time to push the button. I picked up my phone and made the first call. I bypassed customer service entirely and dialed my private wealth manager directly. His name is David, and he is accustomed to my late-night financial directives. "David," I said, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of any emotion. "I need an immediate, non-negotiable hard freeze on the 3 platinum credit accounts ending in 4102, 8891, and 7344. I heard the rapid clicking of his keyboard on the other end of the line. You want to revoke the authorized user status for Beatrice, Jasmine, and Trevor, he asked just to confirm. I told him yes. I instructed him to decline all pending transactions immediately. I do not care if they are mid-swipe at a five-star restaurant or trying to valet their cars. Shut the cards down. I also instructed him to freeze the supplementary checking account my mother used to auto-draft her exorbitant country club dues and luxury car leases. Sweep the remaining balances back into my primary holding account by midnight, I commanded. David did not question me. Within 60 seconds, the financial life support keeping my mother and sister afloat was completely severed. The camera kept spinning, capturing the cold glow of the Manhattan skyline reflecting in my windows as I initiated the second strike. I dialed Marcus, my cutthroat real estate attorney in Atlanta. Marcus had been reviewing the escrow documents for Jasmine and Trevor's sprawling $2 million estate. He knew the numbers inside and out, and he knew that Trevor's income was barely enough to cover the property taxes, let alone the mortgage. Marcus, I said, leaning back into my velvet sofa, pull the guarantor paperwork on the Buckhead property. Withdraw my proof of funds letter entirely and cancel the wire transfer scheduled for tomorrow morning. Marcus paused. He knew the closing was just days away and the sellers were aggressive. Are you absolutely certain, Nia? He asked. If we pull the backing now, Trevor and Jasmine will breach the contract. They will lose their earnest money and the financing will instantly collapse. I told Marcus I had never been more certain of anything in my entire life. Inform the title company that the silent benefactor has officially withdrawn all support. Let Trevor use his brilliant financial literacy to figure out how to close on a $2 million house with an overdrawn checking account. The camera completed its orbit, stopping dead center in front of me as I made the third and most devastating call of the night. This was the kill shot. I dialed Richard, my corporate lawyer, the man who had helped me set up the Blind Shell Corporation 8 years ago, when I decided to secretly rescue my family from my grandfather's massive debts. Richard, I said, keeping my tone strictly professional, it is time to dissolve the entity funding the Anderson Family Trust. Richard let out a long breath. He knew the family dynamics. He knew exactly what this entity meant to my mother's fragile ego. Liquidate the remaining administrative funds, I instructed. Cease all automated deposits into the trust ledger. Sever my legal and financial connection to the trust management effectively immediately. Richard warned me about the immediate fallout. He reminded me that without the Shell Corporation shielding the estate, Beatrice was going to be legally and financially exposed. The creditors from my grandfather's original unpaid debts might come sniffing around again once the protective corporate veil dropped. I smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. That sounds like a problem for the powerful matriarch of the family, I replied. She just informed me that she has the family trust, and she does not need me. Let her manage the reality of what that trust actually looks like. Draft the dissolution papers, Richard. I will sign them tonight. I ended the call and tossed my phone back onto the table. 3 phone calls, less than 10 minutes. That was all it took to completely dismantle a decade of lies, entitlement, and financial abuse. I poured the last drop of my red wine into my glass, savoring the rich, complex taste. My mother wanted me cut off. She wanted me isolated, punished, and groveling at her feet. She was about to wake up to a reality so brutally cold, it would shake her to her absolute core. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city that never slept, and I waited for the storm to hit Atlanta. The storm made landfall exactly 72 hours later on Friday morning. The camera technique shifts here, trading the smooth, calculated glides for a slightly shaky handheld shot that pushes in uncomfortably close to my face. The frame is tight, intimate, and raw, mirroring the chaotic, unraveling reality my family was currently experiencing. It captures the sharp, mocking smile playing on my lips as I lean casually against my kitchen island, holding a fresh cup of espresso. I had a front-row seat to their absolute destruction delivered via a detailed phone call from Marcus, my real estate attorney, who had positioned himself perfectly to witness the entire spectacle. At precisely 9:45 in the morning, Trevor strutted into the opulent glass-walled conference room of a highly exclusive Buckhead title company. Marcus described the scene to me with the precision of a sports announcer calling a championship game. Trevor arrived wearing a bespoke suit. He could not actually afford a flashy watch he definitely leased, and an expression of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He was playing the role of the wealthy, unstoppable executive preparing to close on a $2 million estate. Jasmine was waiting at a nearby boutique cafe, sipping a matcha latte, and already drafting her social media captions about becoming a homeowner, waiting for her husband to hand her the keys to her new kingdom. Trevor sat down in the plush leather chair, confidently clicked his expensive pen, and waited for the closing agent to slide the final stack of heavy life-altering documents across the polished mahogany table. But the documents never came. Instead, the senior closing attorney, a seasoned professional who handled legitimate wealth every single day and had absolutely zero patience for amateur hour, looked over his gold-rimmed glasses and delivered the fatal blow. The attorney calmly informed Trevor that the escrow account was completely empty. The mandatory wire transfer of $200,000 had not cleared the banking system. Furthermore, he explained the proof of funds letter had been explicitly and formally revoked by the issuing guarantor just 48 hours prior. Trevor laughed. Marcus told me it was that specific condescending chuckle Trevor always used when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. Trevor leaned back, adjusted his tie, and told the attorney there must be a clerical error on their end. He demanded they refresh the banking portal loudly, citing his high-yield offshore investments and his supposedly immaculate credit score. He spoke with excessive volume, making sure the entire office of paralegals and assistants could hear him throwing around aggressive financial jargon to intimidate the staff. He pulled out his phone ready to proudly display his banking app, completely oblivious to the fact that his financial backing had evaporated on Tuesday night. The attorney did not flinch. People with real money never do. He simply handed Trevor a printed legally binding notice of cancellation. He clearly stated that the silent financial backer had formally withdrawn all support, and without those verified funds, Trevor was in immediate breach of contract. The earnest money was officially forfeited to the sellers. The deal was completely irrevocably dead. The arrogant facade cracked instantly. Trevor's face turned a dangerous blotchy shade of crimson as the reality of the situation collided with his massive ego. He jumped up from his chair, slamming his hands on the table. He began shouting, demanding to speak to the managing broker, insisting that he was a senior executive at a major firm and that they were making a catastrophic mistake. He desperately reached into his designer wallet and pulled out his shiny platinum credit card, the exact card I had frozen earlier that week. He slammed the plastic onto the table, aggressively ordering the staff to run the card for a massive extension fee, barking commands like a deranged dictator losing his grip on power. The closing agent, maintaining an icy professionalism, calmly took the card and swiped it through the terminal. Declined. Marcus said the sound of the machine rejecting the transaction echoed in the quiet conference room like a gunshot. Trevor snatched the card back, his hands noticeably shaking, and threw down a second premium card. He yelled at the agent to try it again, blaming their payment processing system. The agent swiped the second card. Declined. A thick, humiliating sweat began to form on Trevor's forehead. The illusion of his black excellence, the wealthy persona he had spent years crafting alongside my mother and sister, was disintegrating in real time under the fluorescent lights of the title office. His ego simply refused to accept the failure. Trevor resorted to the only tactic he had left. He started screaming about lawsuits and litigation. He threatened to ruin the entire brokerage, loudly claiming that his mother-in-law controlled a massive, untouchable family trust, and that they would buy the entire office building just to fire everyone inside. He was throwing a full-blown temper tantrum, acting like a spoiled child, rather than the formidable finance titan he pretended to be. The brokerage had absolutely zero tolerance for his theatrics. The managing broker stepped into the room accompanied by two very large, very unamused security guards. They did not care about Trevor's tailored suit, his leased watch, or his imaginary family trust fund. They asked him to leave the premises immediately. When Trevor refused, aggressively pointing his finger at the staff and continuing his unhinged rant about his legal connections, the guards took physical action. They flanked him, grabbed him by the arms, and physically escorted him out of the conference room. They marched the great financial genius through the crowded, elegant lobby. They paraded him past the staring receptionists, the wide-eyed paralegals, and the other affluent clients waiting for their own appointments. Trevor was shouting the entire way, his voice cracking with panic and humiliation, until the guards pushed through the heavy glass doors and deposited him right onto the busy Atlanta sidewalk. The handheld camera pushes in even closer to my face, now capturing the absolute predatory glee in my eyes. I listened to Marcus recount the entire spectacle, and I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my espresso. Trevor, the man who constantly belittled my intelligence, the man who told me not to worry, my pretty little head about complex legalities, had just been physically thrown out of a real estate office like a common trespasser. He had to stand there on the hot pavement, his credit cards declining, his mansion gone, his dignity completely shattered. He had to figure out how to walk down the street, find his expectant, superficial wife at that boutique cafe, and explain to her that their $2 million dream home was officially a mirage. The financial foundation of their marriage was built on my money, and I had just demolished the ground beneath their feet. While Trevor was baking on the hot Atlanta pavement, desperately trying to salvage his shattered ego, my mother was busy orchestrating her own spectacular demise just a few miles away. The camera begins a slow, deliberate push-out, widening the frame millimeter by millimeter to show me sitting perfectly still at my kitchen island. I take a slow sip of my espresso, look directly into the lens, and give a simple, effortless shrug. You see, when you strip a narcissist of their funding, they do not just lose their purchasing power, they lose their entire identity. For a woman like Beatrice, social currency is the only currency that actually matters, and she was about to go completely bankrupt in front of the very people she spent decades trying to impress. That same Friday morning, my mother had booked a private viewing room at one of the most exclusive high-end jewelry boutiques in Phipps Plaza. She did not go alone, of course. A performance requires an audience. She brought along Cynthia and Valerie, two of her most competitive, wealthy, and notoriously gossipy friends from her elite social club. These were women who communicated entirely through backhanded compliments and passive-aggressive observations about each other's wealth. My mother had specifically orchestrated this shopping trip to gloat about Jasmine's new $2 million estate. She wanted to bask in the envy of her peers while sipping complimentary champagne from crystal flutes. According to the boutique manager, who happens to be a very close personal friend of mine, my mother was in rare form that morning. She was holding court in the private velvet-lined room, loudly detailing the limestone fireplaces and the grand dual staircase of Jasmine's new mansion. She was playing the role of the benevolent, ultra-wealthy matriarch to absolute perfection. To solidify her dominance over Cynthia and Valerie, my mother demanded the sales associate bring out their most exclusive diamond pieces. She casually announced that she needed a spectacular housewarming gift for her golden daughter. After trying on several pieces, making sure her friends noticed the carat weight of each one, she settled on a stunning vintage-cut diamond tennis bracelet. The price tag was a staggering $45,000. She did not flinch. She did not negotiate. She simply gave a haughty, aristocratic wave of her hand and told the associate she would take it. She wanted Cynthia and Valerie to witness her dropping an average person's annual salary on a Tuesday morning gift without batting an eye. My mother opened her pristine designer handbag and pulled out her heavy, solid metal platinum card. This was the exact card I had authorized for her years ago. The card tied directly to my personal wealth, the card that had funded her grand illusion for nearly a decade. She placed it on the velvet presentation tray with an arrogant little tap, leaning back to sip her champagne while the associate took the card to the processing terminal. The terminal processed the chip. A sharp negative beep broke the classical music playing softly in the boutique. The screen flashed bright red. Declined. The sales associate, trained to handle high-net-worth clients with extreme discretion, politely returned to the private room. He lowered his voice, offering a professional, apologetic smile. He quietly informed my mother that there seemed to be a slight issue with the authorization and asked if she perhaps had another form of payment. The illusion sustained its first critical fracture. My mother scoffed, her face tightening with immediate irritation. She loudly proclaimed that the boutique's payment processing system must be malfunctioning. She reminded the associate and her eagerly listening friends that there were millions of dollars backing that specific card. She demanded he run it again, insisting that a simple phone call to her private wealth manager would clear up their ridiculous technical error. The associate, maintaining his icy professionalism, returned to the terminal and swiped the card a second time. Declined. The silence in the private viewing room suddenly became deafening. The clinking of champagne glasses stopped. Cynthia and Valerie exchanged a swift, knowing glance. That single silent look between her peers was the exact moment my mother's social execution began. Panic started to bleed through my mother's carefully Botoxed features. Her hands began to shake as she dug back into her purse. She pulled out the 2 backup premium credit cards, the secondary accounts I had also frozen on Tuesday night. She practically threw them onto the velvet tray, her voice rising in pitch as she aggressively ordered the associate to run them both. She was breathing heavily now, the polished, aristocratic matriarch rapidly giving way to a frantic, cornered animal. The associate took the cards, swipe declined, swipe declined. He returned to the room and gently placed the useless plastic back onto the table. He informed her with a chillingly polite tone that every single account was returning a hard code from the issuing bank indicating the cards had been permanently deactivated by the primary account holder. He respectfully asked if she would like to step out of the private room to call her bank, as they needed to prepare the suite for their next scheduled client. My mother completely lost her mind. The camera continues its slow push-out, shrinking my figure in the frame while emphasizing the massive, untouchable fortress of my penthouse. The contrast between my absolute peace and her absolute hysteria is poetic. Beatrice stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her champagne flute. She started screaming at the associate, her voice echoing out of the private room and into the main showroom. She yelled that she was Beatrice Anderson, that she managed an untouchable family trust, and that she could buy and sell everyone in the building. She demanded to speak to the regional director, threatening to have the entire staff fired for insulting her in front of her prominent guests. She was throwing a violent, undignified tantrum over a diamond bracelet she could not afford using money she never actually had. The boutique's security personnel had to step in. A sharply dressed security director approached my mother, blocking her path to the jewelry displays. He firmly but quietly informed her that she was creating a hostile environment for the other shoppers and that she needed to lower her voice or vacate the premises immediately. My mother turned to her friends, desperately looking for backup, looking for validation. But Cynthia and Valerie had already taken 3 steps back. They were holding their designer purses tightly, their faces arranged in masks of fake, pitying concern. They offered hollow words of comfort, suggesting that maybe she should go home and check her finances, but their eyes were gleaming with predatory delight. They were already mentally drafting the text messages they were going to send to every single woman in their sorority chapter, their church committee, and their country club. The great untouchable Beatrice Anderson had just been humiliated and escorted out of a jewelry store because her credit cards were bouncing like rubber balls. My mother snatched her useless deactivated cards off the velvet tray. She shoved past the security guard and marched out of the boutique, her face burning with a humiliation so profound it practically radiated off her skin. She had to walk through the luxury shopping center empty-handed and entirely defeated. Her social standing, the only thing she truly valued in this world, had just been publicly slaughtered. She had no money, she had no bracelet, she had no legacy. The camera finally stops moving, locking me dead center in the wide, expansive frame of my living room. I take one last sip of my espresso, look right at you, and shrug. I warned her. The camera cuts to an extreme close-up of my face. The ambient light in my penthouse slowly dims into absolute darkness, leaving only a sharp cinematic spotlight illuminating my features. My lips curve into a slow, deliberate smirk. The show was far from over. My phone vibrated against the marble counter. It was not my mother. She was likely still standing in the parking lot of Phipps Plaza, paralyzed by her own spectacular social demise. It was not Jasmine or Trevor. They were too busy drowning in the reality of their cancelled mansion. The caller ID displayed the name Sterling. He was the senior managing partner at the highly prestigious Atlanta law firm that handled my mother's imaginary estate. He was the man my mother paid a ridiculous retainer fee just so she could casually mention her estate lawyer at high society brunches and exclusive church committee meetings. I answered on the second ring. Sterling sounded like a man standing on the deck of a sinking ship. He completely abandoned all professional pleasantries. He was hyperventilating the sheer panic entirely bleeding through his $800 an hour persona. He shouted my name the second the call connected, asking if I was in front of a secure terminal. He explained that a catastrophic banking error had just wiped out the entire Anderson family trust. Sterling was talking so fast he was tripping over his own words. He told me his compliance department was getting a relentless barrage of critical fraud alerts. The primary routing numbers were bouncing. The holding accounts were returning null values across the board. The blind shell corporation that supposedly governed the trust was showing up in the global financial registry as formally and permanently dissolved. He sounded absolutely terrified. He told me that my mother was currently screaming at his receptionist in the lobby, demanding he sue the bank, the Federal Reserve, and the entire state of Georgia for gross incompetence. Trevor was apparently blowing up his secondary line aggressively, threatening to have Sterling disbarred for severe financial negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Sterling was begging me to reach out to my high-level corporate banking contacts in New York to reverse what he firmly believed was a massive, illegal cyber attack on the family fortune. I did not interrupt him. I sat perfectly still in the dramatic, isolating light of my apartment and let him ramble. I listened to this seasoned, arrogant attorney completely lose his grip on reality. I could actually hear the muffled, frantic screaming of my mother in the background of his office. She was throwing a violent tantrum demanding answers, shattering the refined, aristocratic image she had spent decades cultivating with this exact law firm. The sheer desperation in her voice bleeding through the phone speaker was absolute music to my ears. When Sterling finally paused to take a breathless gasp of air, I stopped him. I kept my voice incredibly soft, maintaining a dangerously calm and authoritative tone. I told him there was no cyber attack. I told him there was no banking error. I told him to sit down at his heavy mahogany desk, pull up the master ledger for the trust, and look at the actual origin of the routing numbers that had been feeding the estate for the last 8 years. I heard the rapid clicking of his keyboard on the other end of the line. I told him to look past the corporate veil of the shell company he thought he understood so perfectly. I guided him directly to the primary funding source. I waited in the silence while he traced the digits back to their true origin. The typing suddenly stopped. A thick, suffocating silence fell over the line. I explained to him using the precise clinical terminology he was so fond of that the legendary Anderson family trust he thought he was managing went completely insolvent nearly a decade ago. I broke the reality down for him piece by piece so there could be no misunderstanding. I explained that the continuous influx of capital, the massive monthly wire transfers that kept the estate afloat, the mortgage payments on my mother's sprawling house, the luxury car leases, and the ridiculous jewelry boutique authorizations did not come from my late grandfather's brilliant historical investments. They came directly from my personal portfolio. I was the bank, Sterling, I whispered into the receiver. I have always been the bank. I heard a shaky, ragged exhale on the other side of the call. The magnitude of his own firm's oversight and my absolute financial power hit him like a freight train. He realized he had spent years bowing down to my mother, treating her like aristocratic old money, bending over backwards to accommodate her ridiculous demands when she was actually just a dependent living on a secret allowance provided by the daughter she constantly mocked. He realized that Trevor, the man currently threatening his law license, was a parasitic fraud living entirely on my charity. Sterling stammered, his professional composure entirely shattered. He asked me what exactly happened to the shell corporation that shielded the funds. I told him I dissolved it. I told him I liquidated the administrative accounts, wiped the ledgers clean, and permanently severed the financial pipeline. I explained that my mother had sent me a text message explicitly demanding to be cut off from my toxic energy, and I simply honored her request as a respectful, obedient daughter. "You cannot do this, Nia," Sterling pleaded, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper, so my mother would not hear him through the office walls. He told me my mother had absolutely no other assets to her name. He admitted that without those monthly injections from my accounts, she could not even cover the basic property taxes on her house, let alone the exorbitant retainer fee for his law firm. He realized in real time that he was currently dealing with a completely broke client who was in the process of destroying his elegant waiting room. He realized he was never going to get paid for this phone call, nor for any of the legal work he had done for them that month. I smiled into the darkness of my penthouse, my eyes gleaming in the single spotlight. I told Sterling that his client's sudden financial insolvency was no longer my concern. I gave him one last piece of free, highly valuable legal advice. I instructed him to hang up the phone, walk out to his expensive lobby, look my mother dead in the eye, and inform her that her generous, silent benefactor had officially retired. "Tell her the trust is gone, Sterling," I commanded, my voice slicing through his panic. "Tell her she got exactly what she asked for when she sent that text message. Hand her the bill for today's panic attack and wish her the absolute best of luck with Trevor's imaginary offshore accounts." I did not wait for his response. I ended the call. I placed the phone face down on the marble counter. The absolute finality of that click resonated through the room. I had successfully and completely dismantled the financial infrastructure of my abusers. I had exposed their lies to the high society professionals they used to validate their status. The foundation was gone, the money was gone, the illusion was dead. Now it was only a matter of time before they tried to corner me in person to face the reality of the empire I had just burned to the ground. The camera slowly tilts down from the dark, expansive ceiling of my penthouse, gliding silently downward on a seamless vertical slider track. It descends through the shadows, moving past the glowing crystal of a modern chandelier before settling on my silhouette framed against the massive floor-to-ceiling glass. I am standing perfectly still, looking out at the glittering grid of Manhattan. The ambient lighting is intensely cinematic, casting long, powerful shadows across the room. The atmosphere is thick with a heavy, dangerous kind of peace. I just told Sterling the absolute truth over the phone, but the reality of the Anderson family trust is a ghost story that began exactly 8 years ago. To fully appreciate the absolute poetry of my family's current destruction, you have to understand how the illusion was constructed in the first place. You have to understand the staggering weight of the secret I carried, and the blood, sweat, and absolute financial genius it took to keep their fragile world from completely collapsing. My grandfather was a man who projected immense wealth, but operated on a foundation of terrible high-risk leverage. When he passed away unexpectedly, my mother Beatrice immediately positioned herself as the grand heiress of a legendary dynasty. She began planning her social ascension before his body was even buried. She ordered custom designer mourning clothes and started bragging to her elite country club friends about her impending status as the sole manager of a historic family trust. She thought she was inheriting an untouchable kingdom. She had absolutely no idea she was inheriting a massive financial crater. I was 24 years old at the time. I had just secured my first major role at a highly competitive investment bank in New York. I was young, fiercely ambitious, and hungry to prove myself in a ruthless industry. Because my mother could not be bothered to read complex legal documents, she dumped the estate paperwork on me to organize and file. I spent 3 sleepless nights running the numbers, tracing the offshore accounts, and unearthing the horrific truth. My grandfather had heavily mortgaged his commercial properties, made disastrous speculative bets in overseas markets, and completely drained his liquid cash to cover the relentless margin calls. The legendary Anderson estate was not just bankrupt, it was millions of dollars in the red. The banks were preparing to seize absolutely everything, including the sprawling Atlanta home my mother had just proudly claimed as her matriarchal palace. I held the foreclosure notices in my hands, sitting in a tiny studio apartment, completely paralyzed by what this revelation would do to my mother. Her entire identity, her fragile narcissistic ego, was inextricably tied to her social standing. If the women in her prominent sorority, her church committee, and her elite circles found out she was utterly broke, it would not just embarrass her, it would destroy her will to live. I was 24, and despite a lifetime of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family, I still desperately craved her maternal approval. I foolishly believed that if I saved her, if I protected her from absolute social ruin, she would finally look at me with the same pride and affection she reserved for Jasmine. I did not tell her the truth. I swallowed the massive secret and went straight to work. Using every ounce of financial literacy I possessed, I aggressively approached my grandfather's creditors. I negotiated brutal settlements, leveraging my banking connections to buy out the toxic debt for pennies on the dollar. But that was only the beginning of the nightmare. To keep my mother from discovering the bankruptcy, I had to seamlessly replace the vanished funds. I contacted Richard, a brilliant corporate attorney, and we meticulously set up a blind shell corporation. We structured it so my mother was listed as an honorary manager, giving her the legal illusion of absolute control, while I remained the sole anonymous financial backer, quietly pumping capital into the accounts. Then began the most grueling 8 years of my entire life. I worked brutal, mind-numbing 80-hour weeks. I clawed my way up the corporate ladder, taking on the most toxic portfolios and the highest stress accounts just to secure the massive bonuses required to keep the shell corporation fully funded. Every single time I closed a multi-million-dollar deal, a massive percentage of my personal earnings went straight into the Phantom Trust. I paid off the silent mortgage on the Atlanta house. I funded the exorbitant auto drafts for her luxury car leases. I bankrolled Jasmine's entire existence, from her designer wardrobe to her lavish wedding to Trevor. And what did I get in return for buying their reality? I got absolute relentless cruelty. As the fake trust account swelled with my hard-earned money, my mother's arrogance multiplied exponentially. She convinced herself that her brilliant management of my grandfather's money was the sole reason for their success. The richer she felt, the more she looked down on me. She used the very money I was killing myself to provide to mock my lifestyle. She laughed at my small apartments and my long work hours, entirely unaware that I lived modestly so she could live like a queen. When Jasmine married Trevor, my mother used the Phantom Trust to assert her dominance, elevating them as the true successors to the family legacy, while actively pushing me further into the shadows. I watched them mutate into greedy, entitled parasites, utterly oblivious to the fact that they were feeding entirely on my veins. I watched Trevor parade around with a supreme sense of white privilege, acting like a financial titan while swiping credit cards paid for by a black woman he openly disrespected. I spent my 20s sacrificing my own peace, my own luxury, and my own youth to protect a mother who would eventually text me that I was toxic and tell me I was cut off. The camera continues to slide slowly around me, capturing a profound sense of absolute closure settling over my features. The true tragedy of their current situation is not that they lost their wealth. The tragedy is that they never actually possessed it. For 8 years, my mother played the role of an aristocratic titan, but she was nothing more than an actress on a stage I built reading from a script I financed. The moment she sent that text message, she did not just insult her daughter. She fired her only producer. They are currently sitting in Atlanta, surrounded by luxury items they never earned, panicking over bank accounts they never truly owned. They are scrambling to find a glitch in the system, waiting for the bank to apologize and turn the money back on. But there is no glitch. There is no backup plan. There is only the harsh, undeniable truth waiting to greet them. And tomorrow night, at the most prestigious fundraising gala of the season, I am going to make sure they swallow every single drop of that truth in front of everyone they desperately want to impress. The camera transitions to a sharp low-angle tracking shot. It captures my emerald silk gown sweeping across the polished marble floor. I rise from a plush velvet sofa inside the exclusive VIP lounge of the grand ballroom. The camera stays low, moving steadily alongside me, tilted upward to emphasize my absolute authority and unshakable composure. I am not hiding in New York. I flew down to Atlanta on Saturday morning specifically to attend the annual Heritage Endowment Gala. This is the absolute pinnacle of the social season for the city's Black elite. The guest list is a highly curated collection of corporate titans, prominent political figures, and generational wealth. This is the exact room where my mother has spent the last 8 years, parading around acting like royalty and spending my money to buy the respect of the people currently sipping champagne around me. I knew they would find me here. I wanted them to find me here. The heavy, ornate oak doors at the far end of the ballroom swing open with a violent, disruptive thud. The sudden aggressive noise causes several high-profile guests to stop their conversations and turn their heads. Beatrice, Jasmine, and Trevor march into the elegant venue like a storm of desperation. They clearly did not secure invitations. They must have bullied a junior event coordinator or frantically pushed past the front desk staff in their manic state. The contrast between them and the refined atmosphere of the gala is jarring. My mother is wearing a designer evening gown from 2 seasons ago, but her usual immaculate aristocratic poise is completely shattered. Her hair is slightly frizzy, and her posture is rigid with panic. Jasmine has dark, tear-stained streaks under her eyes, her hands desperately clutching her expensive handbag, as if it is a life preserver. Trevor looks absolutely deranged. His face is flushed a dangerous shade of red. He is sweating visibly through the collar of his suit, and he looks like a man who has just stared directly into the abyss of his own financial ruin. They spot me immediately. I am standing perfectly still in the VIP section, surrounded by actual billionaires, venture capitalists, and the very high society matriarchs my mother so desperately wants to impress. Instead of maintaining any semblance of decorum, they storm straight across the ballroom floor. They walk with the aggressive, entitled energy of people who still believe they have the upper hand. My mother leads the charge. She thinks she can use this affluent audience to her advantage. She genuinely believes that the threat of public humiliation will force me into immediate submission. She assumes I will panic to protect my professional reputation in front of my peers. She assumes I will quietly unlock the accounts just to make a scene disappear. She has completely miscalculated the woman she is dealing with. I calmly excuse myself from a conversation with the CEO of a major commercial bank. The low-angle camera tracks my deliberate, measured steps as I walk forward to intercept them before they can breach the velvet ropes of the VIP section. I stop and stand my ground. My mother halts just 2 feet away from me. She points a manicured, trembling finger directly at my face. Her voice vibrates with a chaotic mixture of intense rage and absolute terror. She does not bother lowering her volume. She loudly demands to know what kind of sick, twisted, vindictive game I am playing with her life. She orders me to open my banking application and unlock the platinum cards right this exact second. She tells me I have crossed a line that I can never uncross, and that she will not leave this ballroom until the funds are fully restored. Trevor aggressively steps up next to her, attempting to puff out his chest and project some kind of masculine authority. He loudly informs me that my childish emotional tantrum has officially ruined their house closing and jeopardized his entire professional reputation. He aggressively states that his credit has taken a massive hit because the automatic payments on his luxury vehicles bounced yesterday morning. He tells me that Jasmine had to endure the ultimate degrading humiliation of borrowing cash from a neighbor just to pay for groceries, because every single account tied to their names was returning a hard decline. He uses aggressive corporate buzzwords, threatening to hold me personally liable for the financial damages their delayed closing has caused. He tries to tower over me, completely oblivious to the fact that the low-angle camera framing makes him look small, desperate, and entirely powerless against my calm posture. Jasmine immediately launches into her reliable rehearsed victim act. She starts crying loudly on cue, making sure her sobs carry across the quieted ballroom. She wails that I am a jealous, bitter, evil sister, trying to destroy her family out of pure spite. She cries that the stress I am causing is dangerous for a woman trying to build a family. She wants the wealthy onlookers to hear her distress. She wants the elite crowd to view me as the cruel, heartless corporate monster who is mercilessly attacking her own innocent blood. She puts her hands over her face, leaning dramatically into Trevor's shoulder, performing the role of the distressed golden child to absolute perfection. I do not raise my voice. I do not flinch. I do not break eye contact. I stand perfectly straight, letting the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment. I look directly at my mother and speak with a volume perfectly calibrated to carry to the surrounding guests who have stopped to watch the spectacle. I ask her a very simple, very dangerous question. I ask her why the grand wealthy manager of the legendary Anderson Family Trust is throwing a public temper tantrum over a few frozen credit cards. I tilt my head slightly and ask her why a woman of her immense generational wealth needs my express permission to access her own, supposedly bottomless fortune. I ask her why Trevor, a brilliant financial executive with offshore accounts, is crying about a bounced car payment in the middle of a charity gala. Beatrice realizes the trap instantly. I can see the sheer panic flash behind her eyes. She looks around the room. The prominent women from her elite sorority are watching closely. The respected church leaders are whispering behind their champagne flutes. The flawless, wealthy facade she spent a decade building is cracking in real time under the chandeliers. But instead of backing down, her extreme narcissism forces her to double down. She cannot admit defeat. She hisses at me, her voice venomous and desperate. She falsely claims that I am legally obligated to release the administrative funds. She threatens to tell every single person in the ballroom that I am a fraudulent, ungrateful child who somehow manipulated the banking system to steal money from the family estate. She believes fear will make me fold. She believes the sheer embarrassment of a public family feud will force me to pull out my phone and restore her power. I just smile. I do not reach for my phone. I do not offer a single apology. I look past her and subtly gesture for the event security guards who have been nervously watching the commotion to stand by and wait. I am not going to quiet her down. I am not going to protect her dignity. I am going to let her dig her own grave right here in front of the exact people she spent my money to impress. I am going to let her scream, and then I am going to lay out the undeniable bloody truth for the entire city of Atlanta to witness. The heavy oak front door of my home shuddered under a series of aggressive rapid knocks. I was standing in the foyer holding a cup of black coffee, completely unsurprised by the sudden disruption. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the door open, blocking the threshold entirely. Standing on my porch were Trent and Morgan, looking like two predators who had just realized their trap was empty. Trent wore his usual tailored suit, though the tie was slightly askew, his face flushed with a dangerous mix of entitlement and sheer panic. Morgan stood slightly behind him, her designer sunglasses pushed up into her hair, clutching her luxury handbag like a shield. They tried to push their way inside, assuming the usual rules of family courtesy applied. I planted my feet firmly, my broad shoulders filling the doorframe, and raised my hand. I told them they were trespassing, and that this house was no longer open to people who treated my livelihood like their personal cash machine. Trent puffed out his chest, attempting to physically intimidate a man who had spent 3 decades hauling construction materials. It was a laughable effort. Morgan demanded to be let in, her voice shrill and echoing down the quiet suburban street. She yelled that I was overreacting, that freezing the business accounts was an act of warfare, and that we needed to sit down in the living room right now to fix my catastrophic mistake. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looked down at them, and stated clearly that we were not fixing anything. Trent realized physical intimidation was a massive failure, so he immediately pivoted to the only weapon he actually understood. He pulled a thick envelope from his leather briefcase and shoved it toward my chest. He started barking legal terminology, stringing together aggressive buzzwords about fiduciary duty, breach of contract, and unauthorized asset seizure. He loudly proclaimed that my decision to lock down the commercial accounts was entirely illegal because Morgan was a registered partner in the development firm. He threatened to drag me into a brutal, drawn-out litigation process that would completely bankrupt me. He claimed he had a team of vicious corporate litigators on retainer who were currently preparing an emergency injunction to force the banks to restore their access by Monday morning. I did not even look at the envelope. I let it fall from his hand, the white paper striking the porch floor. I stepped forward, forcing Trent to take an uncomfortable step back down the stairs. I spoke with a quiet, lethal certainty that completely shattered his corporate facade. I reminded him that Morgan was an administrative partner on paper, a courtesy title I gave her so she could feel important at her charity luncheons. I asked Trent if he actually bothered to read the foundational deeds to the commercial plots they were currently trying to leverage for their new vanity project. I watched the blood drain from his face as I laid out the absolute truth. I bought that commercial land 30 years ago. I secured those deeds by working double shifts at the lumberyard, destroying my knees and sacrificing my youth to build a legitimate empire from absolute scratch. I own the dirt beneath those buildings. I own the bricks that form the walls. I own the holding company that issues Morgan her unearned salary. There is no corporate veil for his lawyers to pierce, because I am the sole, undisputed owner of the entire operation. Trent's legal threats were completely toothless, barking at a man who literally owned the ground he was standing on. Morgan recognized that her husband's aggressive legal tactics had completely imploded, so she instantly switched to the playbook she had perfected since childhood. Her eyes welled up with forced tears, her lip trembling as she reached out to grab my forearm. I pulled my arm away, refusing the contact. She cried out that I was being heartless, that her mother Yvonne would be absolutely devastated to see me treating her own flesh and blood this way. Morgan weaponized her late mother's memory, sobbing loudly on my porch, claiming that Yvonne had always wanted the family wealth to secure a grand legacy for the next generation. She accused me of dishonoring Yvonne's dying wishes by destroying her daughter's financial stability. The mention of Yvonne was meant to gut me, to trigger my grief and force me into immediate submission. Instead, it ignited a profound cold fury inside my chest. I looked my daughter dead in the eye and dismantled her performance without a single ounce of mercy. I told Morgan that Yvonne would be utterly ashamed of the parasitic, greedy woman standing in front of me. I reminded her that Yvonne and I built our life by saving every penny, wearing secondhand clothes, and eating cheap meals while we poured every ounce of our energy into securing a future. I listed Morgan's recent expenses with clinical precision: the $50,000 kitchen remodel she just charged to the company card, the luxury vacations to Cabo, the ridiculous designer wardrobe she bought while simultaneously ignoring the invoice for her own child's medical bills. I told her that she was not building a grand family legacy, but was actively bleeding her mother's hard work completely dry to fund a shallow, pathetic social media lifestyle. I stated that invoking Yvonne's name to justify her unhinged financial gluttony was the most disgusting, disrespectful tactic she had ever attempted. The fake tears stopped, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, panicked realization that her final emotional manipulation had completely failed. The air on the porch turned entirely still. Trent was staring at the dropped envelope on the concrete, absolutely defeated, while Morgan clutched her luxury bag, completely stripped of her usual arrogant armor. They had come here to demand my immediate surrender and realized they were standing in front of a brick wall they could never break down. I pointed a steady finger toward the street, indicating the exact path they needed to take to leave my property. I informed them that the locks on the corporate office had already been changed, and the security team had strict instructions to deny them entry. I delivered my final non-negotiable terms. I told them they had exactly 30 days to clear their personal belongings out of the company assets and find a way to finance their own lives. 30 days before the corporate accounts were permanently severed and the luxury vehicles they drove were repossessed by the fleet management team. I stepped back inside my home, looked at their shocked, pale faces one last time, and firmly shut the heavy oak door. The lock engaged with a loud final click. I walked back to my kitchen to finish my coffee. The 30-day countdown had officially begun, and I was going to enjoy watching every single second of it tick away. The camera executes a rapid, sharp whip pan, tracking the precise, deliberate motion of my right hand as I slice it through the air. Two massive event security guards dressed in flawless black suits and equipped with earpieces are rapidly advancing across the marble floor to physically remove my uninvited relatives. My hand raises. I extend a single authoritative finger. The camera captures the exact moment the guards see my signal. They freeze instantly, nodding respectfully before stepping back into the velvet-draped shadows of the VIP lounge. I do not want them to drag my family out just yet. I want to handle this absolute mess personally. I want to look my sister in the eye while her entire manufactured reality crumbles under the chandeliers. Trevor has completely exhausted his vocabulary of aggressive corporate buzzwords. He is standing there sweating through his expensive collar, realizing his legal threats bounced off me like paper airplanes against a brick wall. Jasmine recognizes that her husband's intimidation tactics have utterly failed. She immediately realizes she has to deploy the only weapon she has ever successfully wielded in her 29 years of life. She taps into the deeply ingrained, carefully rehearsed role of the ultimate victim. Jasmine forcefully pushes past Trevor, stepping into the center of the confrontation. Her face undergoes a miraculous, instantaneous transformation. The aggressive, entitled sneer vanishes, replaced by wide, incredibly vulnerable eyes. Real tears begin to well up and spill over her meticulously applied makeup, cutting dark, dramatic tracks down her cheeks. She ensures her posture appears fragile and broken. She raises her voice deliberately, amplifying her sobs, so that the surrounding crowd of venture capitalist real estate moguls and high society matriarchs can hear every single word. She is weaponizing the gaze of the Atlanta elite, attempting to use peer pressure and public shame to force me into immediate submission. She cries out, her voice trembling with a masterclass level of theatrical devastation. She wails that she simply cannot understand how her own flesh and blood could be so unspeakably cruel. She tells me that I am a deeply bitter, deeply broken woman who is entirely consumed by a sick, relentless jealousy. She projects her voice across the silent ballroom, loudly declaring that I am desperately envious of her beautiful marriage and her perfect, flawless life. She claims that because I am a lonely, miserable corporate drone without a husband or a family of my own, I have decided to actively sabotage the future of my unborn niece and nephew. Jasmine takes a dramatic step forward, pressing her hands against her chest, as if her heart is physically breaking in two. She tells the audience of billionaires that I froze their accounts and canceled their dream home out of pure, unadulterated spite. She loudly accuses me of punishing her simply because she found true love and happiness, while I am destined to grow old alone in a cold, empty Manhattan apartment. She plays the innocent, loving sister who just wants to build a warm home for her family, painting me as the vindictive, emotionally barren villain who uses money to abuse her own kin. It is a spectacular, award-winning performance of pure manipulation. I stand there in my emerald silk gown, my posture completely relaxed, letting her entirely exhaust her vocal cords. I do not interrupt her. I do not rush to defend my character. I simply watch her cry, analyzing the profound level of delusion required to stand in a room full of self-made millionaires and scream about a house she cannot actually afford. The guests around us are captivated, holding their champagne flutes in absolute silence, watching the meltdown of the golden child. Jasmine thinks she is winning their sympathy. She does not realize that people with actual generational wealth can spot a grifter from a mile away. They are not looking at her with pity. They are looking at her with absolute, unvarnished disgust, seeing that Jasmine's emotional performance is not cracking. My icy composure, my mother decides it is time to deliver the final authoritative blow. Beatrice steps in front of Jasmine, placing a protective maternal hand on her golden daughter's shaking shoulder. Beatrice squares her shoulders desperately, trying to summon the aristocratic matriarchal power she has wielded over me since childhood. She wants to look like a regal queen, disciplining an unruly, rebellious subject. She glares at me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of raw panic and supreme entitlement. She issues a stern, unwavering command, treating me exactly like a disobedient teenager rather than a 32-year-old private equity director. She orders me to stop embarrassing the family name in front of the entire city. She tells me to open my purse, pull out my phone log into my banking application, and unlock the platinum accounts right this exact second. She does not ask. She demands complete and immediate compliance. My mother raises her chin, attempting to look down her nose at me. She loudly declares that if I do not reverse the financial freeze and wire the $200,000 escrow deposit by the end of the night, she will publicly disown me. She threatens to tell every single prominent figure in our community, every pastor, every sorority sister, and every business leader in that very ballroom that I am a deceitful, ungrateful thief. She threatens to ruin my professional reputation, claiming she will inform my corporate board in New York that I am financially abusing my elderly mother and my pregnant sister. She tells me I have exactly 1 minute to fix the catastrophic mess I have created, or she will personally ensure that I am banished from polite society forever. She stands there breathing heavily, waiting for her absolute authority to crush my defiance. She fully expects me to crumble under the sheer weight of public humiliation. She expects the fear of losing my family and my reputation to force me to pull out my phone and surrender my wealth back into her greedy, manicured hands. I do not reach for my purse. I do not look away. I maintain absolute lethal eye contact with the woman who spent 8 years bleeding me dry while telling the world I was a disappointment. The rapid pan of the camera has long since settled, locking onto my face in a tight, steady frame as I prepare to respond. The absolute silence in the VIP lounge is deafening. My mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law are standing in front of me, breathless, waiting for their psychological warfare to yield the payout they so desperately need. They think they have backed me into an inescapable corner. They have absolutely no idea that I am holding a lit match, and they are standing in a room soaked entirely in gasoline. I take a slow, deliberate breath, letting the tension in the room stretch to its absolute breaking point. I am about to tear down their entire universe, and I am going to make sure every single person in this ballroom remembers it for the rest of their lives. I bypass my phone entirely. My fingers grasp a thick, tightly bound stack of official documents I deliberately brought with me on my flight from New York. I pull the heavy, notarized financial statements from my clutch and hold them up in the air for a fraction of a second, letting the ambient light catch the crisp white edges. I look my mother dead in the eyes, ensuring my voice is perfectly modulated, projecting clearly across the silent lounge so that every single venture capitalist, elite matriarch, and powerful executive can hear my every word. I tell her to go ahead and disown me. I tell her to scream it from the rooftops. In fact, I offer to save her the trouble and announce it to the room myself. I declare that those papers are not just bank statements. They are certified, audited financial records proving that the Anderson Family Trust is nothing more than a hollow, dead shell corporation. I tell the room that for 8 agonizing years, every single luxury vacation to the Caribbean, every designer handbag flaunted at country club dinners, and every exorbitant gala ticket purchased by my family was funded directly by my personal income. I explain that I poured the bonuses I earned from grueling 80-hour work weeks as a private equity director in Manhattan straight into a ghost account solely to protect my mother's fragile narcissistic ego from the reality of her own poverty. Jasmine's fake theatrical sobbing instantly stops. The tears dry up the second the reality of sudden terrifying poverty hits her like a physical blow. The absolute horror of losing her pristine, unearned lifestyle paralyzes her. Trevor opens his mouth to speak desperately, attempting to salvage his crumbling reputation in front of the surrounding billionaires who are now staring at him with undisguised contempt. I cut him off immediately before he can utter a single corporate buzzword. I look at Trevor and tell him that the escrow on his $2 million dream home was canceled because I officially withdrew my charity. I remind him loudly that he is a grown man playing house with his wife's sister's money, and that his aggressive legal threats are as empty as his checking account. I look back at my mother. The women from her prestigious sorority chapter, the very friends she brought to the jewelry boutique just days prior, are whispering behind their hands, shaking their heads. The prominent businessmen she tried to impress are looking at her with unvarnished pity and absolute disgust. The social execution is total and irreversible. Her entire identity was built on the perception of Black excellence and generational wealth, and I just exposed her as an absolute fraud in front of her entire kingdom. I remind her of the text message she sent me on Tuesday evening. She explicitly demanded that I cut contact, warning me that she did not need my toxic energy because she had the family trust. I tell her that I am simply honoring her request like a respectful, obedient daughter. She wanted to rely solely on the family fortune, and now she is free to do exactly that. I inform her that the trust has exactly $0 in it, the accounts are permanently closed, and my wallet is shut forever. I do not flinch under my mother's screaming threats. I do not cower under the immense weight of the public spectacle she is trying to create. I reach a steady, deliberate hand into my emerald silk designer clutch. My mother's eyes dart to my hands, a spark of triumphant relief flashing across her perfectly powdered face. She genuinely believes I am reaching for my phone. She thinks I am finally breaking under the immense pressure of social humiliation, that I am pulling out my device to unlock her precious platinum cards and wire the money to save my own reputation. She is tragically, catastrophically mistaken. The camera executes a sudden aggressive zoom in. Smack! I slam the stack of papers directly onto the polished glass surface of the nearest VIP cocktail table. The sharp, violent crack of the paper hitting the glass cuts through the low murmur of the ballroom like a gunshot. The camera instantly pans up, tilting swiftly from the scattered financial records to capture my face. My expression is not fearful. It is not angry. It is absolutely radiantly victorious. I have the ultimate winning hand, and I am laying it out for the entire city of Atlanta to see. I turn my gaze slightly to address the captivated audience of the city's elite. I introduce them to the grand legendary Anderson Family Trust that my mother has been boasting about at their exclusive charity luncheons for the past decade. I state with absolute clinical precision that my grandfather died completely bankrupt 8 years ago. I watch a collective audible gasp ripple through the crowd of high society guests. I point down at the thick stack of documents resting on the cocktail table. I turn my lethal focus back to Beatrice. The color has entirely drained from her face. Her jaw is trembling, and she looks as if the polished marble floor has just completely vanished beneath her designer heels. I deliver the absolute undeniable truth, stripping away the last remaining shreds of her aristocratic facade. I tell her she does not possess a single dime to her name. She does not own the sprawling suburban estate she currently lives in because my holding company holds the exclusive deed. She does not even own the outdated designer gown she is currently wearing because I personally cleared the credit card balance for it last month. She is not a wealthy, powerful matriarch. She is a completely broke dependent, living entirely on a secret allowance provided by the exact daughter she just publicly called a disgrace. I look back at my mother. The women from her prestigious sorority chapter, the very friends she brought to the jewelry boutique just days prior, are whispering behind their hands, shaking their heads. The prominent businessmen she tried to impress are looking at her with unvarnished pity and absolute disgust. The social execution is total and irreversible. Her entire identity was built on the perception of Black excellence and generational wealth, and I just exposed her as an absolute fraud in front of her entire kingdom. I remind her of the text message she sent me on Tuesday evening. She explicitly demanded that I cut contact, warning me that she did not need my toxic energy because she had the family trust. I tell her that I am simply honoring her request like a respectful, obedient daughter. She wanted to rely solely on the family fortune, and now she is free to do exactly that. I inform her that the trust has exactly $0 in it, the accounts are permanently closed, and my wallet is shut forever. The heavy silence in the ballroom is abruptly shattered by a desperate guttural scoff. Trevor simply cannot accept the absolute obliteration of his ego. The camera begins a smooth, calculated Steadicam sweep, carving a flawless semicircle around my position. The gliding movement visually isolates me from the surrounding chaos, establishing that I am the undeniable gravitational center of this entire room. Every single person, every billionaire, and every breathless socialite is caught in my orbit. The rotating shot captures Trevor stepping forward, his face twisting into a grotesque mask of defensive rage. He aggressively points a finger at the documents resting on the glass table, desperately attempting to claw back a fraction of his shattered masculine authority. He raises his voice, pitching it loudly to ensure the surrounding executives can hear him. He completely abandons his polished finance bro persona and resorts to frantic, unhinged denial. He declares that the documents on the table are entirely fabricated. He insists that he has personally reviewed the trust ledgers, that he understands corporate structuring better than I ever could, and that my claims of funding the estate are nothing more than libelous, vindictive lies. He aggressively tells the room that I am trying to orchestrate a hostile financial takeover of my mother's assets by presenting fraudulent bank statements. He uses aggressive terminology, throwing around words like fiduciary misconduct and criminal defamation. He genuinely believes that if he speaks with enough arrogant conviction, the wealthy onlookers will dismiss me as a hysterical, jealous woman and side with the confident white man in the tailored suit. I do not raise my voice to match his panic. I let the Steadicam complete its sweeping arc, stopping to frame my face in a tight, commanding profile as I look at him with absolute predatory pity. I wait for him to completely exhaust his breath. I wait until his desperate corporate buzzwords hang in the dead air of the VIP lounge, entirely unsupported by reality. Trevor, I say, my voice slicing through the tension like a scalpel. You really should have stayed completely silent. I reached down to the bottom of my emerald clutch. I did not just bring bank statements to this gala. I brought the absolute undeniable instruments of his criminal destruction. I pull out a second, much thicker bound folder. This one is sealed with a bright red legal tab. I do not place this folder gently on the table. I lock my eyes onto Trevor's violently sweating face, and I throw the heavy stack of documents directly at his chest. He instinctively scrambles to catch it, fumbling the heavy file against his expensive suit jacket. He looks utterly foolish, clutching the red tabbed folder like a shield. I take a slow, deliberate step forward, entirely invading his personal space. I look up at him, my expression radiating cold, calculating vengeance. I announce to the silent, captivated ballroom that I ordered a comprehensive third-party forensic audit of the Shell Corporation's administrative accounts last month. I tell Trevor that while I was busy funding his wife's luxury lifestyle, I noticed several highly irregular, unauthorized capital bleedouts occurring at the administrative level. I explain, projecting my voice so my mother and sister catch every single devastating syllable, that the money was not just being spent on designer bags and car leases. It was actively being stolen. The color drains entirely from Trevor's face. The aggressive, arrogant finance executive instantly transforms into a terrified, cornered thief. He tries to open his mouth to stammer out a denial, but his vocal cords completely fail him. I turn slightly, addressing the crowd of high-net-worth individuals who understand exactly what a forensic audit implies. I reveal the absolute pathetic truth about Jasmine's perfect husband. I state clearly that for the past 3 years, Trevor has been systematically and criminally embezzling massive sums of cash directly from the administrative holding accounts of the very trust he thought my mother controlled. I tell the room that the brilliant financial titan standing before them is actually a catastrophic failure who secretly racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in toxic margin calls and degenerate sports gambling debts. I look back at Trevor dissecting his entire life in front of the Atlanta elite. I detail exactly how he executed the theft. I explain that he secretly forged my mother's signature on dozens of internal wire authorization forms, funneling the stolen cash through a series of amateur, easily traceable offshore dummy accounts in the Cayman Islands. He used the money I bled for the money my mother proudly believed was her inherited kingdom to desperately cover his catastrophic gambling losses and save his own kneecaps from aggressive private creditors. I watch his knees actually buckle slightly under the weight of the public exposure. The collective gasp from the elite crowd is deafening. The older prominent businessmen in the room look at Trevor with pure, unadulterated revulsion. Stealing from a corporate entity is a crime, but secretly embezzling from your own mother-in-law to pay off degenerate gambling debts is a social death sentence. He is entirely radioactive. I take one final step closer to him, lowering my voice so that only he, my mother, and my sister can hear the absolute finality in my tone. I tell him that the red-tabbed folder he is currently clutching contains every single forged signature, every illegal routing number, and the exact IP addresses he used to authorize the fraudulent transfers from his office computer. I inform him that a duplicate copy of that exact file is currently sitting on the desk of the district attorney, as well as the compliance division of the Financial Regulatory Board that issues his professional licenses. I look at Jasmine, whose face is currently contorted into a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. I look at my mother, who is staring at her prized golden son-in-law as if he has just mutated into a monster. Trevor was her ultimate trophy. He was the man she used to demean my independence, the man she claimed was a blessing to our family, the man who supposedly possessed the financial literacy I lacked. And I just exposed him as a desperate, pathetic criminal who forged her name to steal from the very accounts she used to oppress me. Trevor drops the folder. It hits the marble floor with a heavy, definitive thud. The papers spill out, displaying the highlighted, undeniable proof of his felonies for everyone in the front row to see. He does not try to defend himself anymore. He does not spout any more aggressive legal jargon. He takes a staggering step backward, his eyes darting wildly around the room, looking for an exit that does not exist. The Steadicam holds perfectly steady on my face, capturing the absolute undisputed dominance radiating from my posture. The board is entirely mine. I have stripped them of their wealth, their status, and their pride. Now I am going to stand back and watch the remaining pieces of their fractured toxic alliance violently tear each other apart. The camera tilts on its axis, locking into a sharp, deliberate Dutch angle. The grand, gilded horizon of the ballroom visibly slants, perfectly capturing the absolute psychological freefall my family is currently experiencing. The visual disorientation mirrors the exact moment the ground vanishes beneath Jasmine's designer heels. She is staring at the spilled documents on the marble floor, her breathing shallow and erratic. Trevor is paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He thinks the worst is over. He actually believes that exposing his corporate embezzlement and his pathetic sports gambling addiction is the absolute rock bottom of this public execution. He is catastrophically mistaken. I have one more bullet left in the chamber, and it is reserved specifically for the grand illusion of my sister's flawless marriage. I do not let the silence linger. I step closer to Jasmine, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating tension of the VIP lounge. I instruct her to look down at the third page of the scattered audit resting near the toe of her shoe. I point my finger at a sequence of recurring high-dollar wire transfers. I project my voice, ensuring the absolute stillness of the room amplifies every single syllable. I ask Jasmine if she enjoyed the romantic couple's getaway to Aspen last December. I watch her face contort in pure raw confusion. She stammers, her voice trembling, saying they did not go to Aspen last winter. She quietly states that they spent the holidays at our mother's house. I give a slow, predatory nod. I state that her answer is incredibly fascinating, considering Trevor charged $30,000 to the administrative trust account for a private ski chalet, first-class flights, and luxury winter equipment during that exact time frame. Jasmine's eyes dart to Trevor. The wealthy onlookers collectively lean in, absolutely enthralled by the carnage. Trevor physically shrinks. He raises his hands in a desperate defensive gesture, pleading with her to just let him explain. But I refuse to let him control the narrative for a single second. I direct Jasmine to look at the next line item on the forensic report. It details a recurring monthly charge of $6,000 for a luxury high-rise apartment lease in Midtown Atlanta. I ask Jasmine if she knows who lives at that premium address. Trevor lets out a pathetic whimpering sound. He looks like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. I announce to the silent, captivated room that the Midtown apartment is currently occupied by a 24-year-old former marketing assistant from Trevor's firm. A shockwave of disgusted whispers ripples through the elite crowd. But I do not stop there. I mercilessly list the recent purchases logged in the audit. A vintage Cartier love bracelet purchased in February. A massive cash down payment on a brand new Range Rover executed in April. A $10,000 designer handbag bought just 3 days ago. I look pointedly at my sister's bare wrists and the outdated purse she is currently clutching. I loudly point out that Trevor has been playing the role of the devoted high society husband while secretly using the money I earned to play sugar daddy to a woman fresh out of college. I look directly into the tilted camera lens. I remind you of the vicious, cruel text messages my mother and sister sent me just a few days ago. They called me unlovable. They claimed my aggressive corporate energy drove decent men away. They bragged about Trevor elevating our family standing, using his mere presence to mock my single status. Now the absolute, undeniable truth is laid bare on the marble floor. Jasmine's golden, perfect marriage is a complete, humiliating sham. The man she paraded around as her ultimate prize did not just betray her. He funded his infidelity using the very money she demanded I hand over to him. He was financing his mistress with the cash I bled for, all while telling me I was too bitter and lonely to understand the value of family. The last remaining shred of Trevor's arrogant, privileged persona completely evaporates. The man who tried to lecture me about tax brackets, capital gains, and corporate liability is now weeping. Actual, genuine tears are streaming down his red, blotchy face. He drops to his knees right there in the VIP lounge, frantically grabbing at the scattered papers on the floor. He begs Jasmine to understand loudly, claiming that the affair meant absolutely nothing. He tries to weaponize his own incompetence, sobbing that the massive stress of his hidden debt pushed him to make terrible, irrational choices. It is the most pathetic, degrading display of failed masculinity I have ever witnessed. The aggressive finance bro who stormed into this gala ready to threaten me with legal action is now crawling on the marble floor begging for mercy from a woman who has no money, no house, and no future with him. The prominent businessmen and high society matriarchs watch his breakdown with utter revulsion. He is not just a criminal, he is an absolute coward. Beatrice is frozen. My mother, the grand architect of this entire social illusion, is staring at Trevor in sheer unadulterated horror. The flawless white son-in-law she worshipped, the man she used to demean my independence, has publicly humiliated her golden daughter in the worst way imaginable. Her pristine aristocratic world is burning to ash all around her, and she realizes she has absolutely no power to put out the flames. The tilted camera captures the exact moment the invincible toxic alliance between my mother, my sister, and her husband fundamentally shatters. They are no longer a united front allied against me. They are 3 drowning people, and they are about to violently pull each other under. Jasmine is the first one to completely detonate. The fragile, carefully manicured facade of the sweet, innocent golden child is permanently gone, replaced by a raw, unhinged fury that distorts her entire face. She turns her gaze from the forensic audit documents on the floor and fixes it directly on Trevor, who is still groveling on his knees. For a fraction of a second, the tilted Dutch angle frame holds the suffocating stillness of the room, and then the explosion happens. Jasmine lunges forward, her arms swinging in a violent, wide arc. The heavy, resonant crack of her palm striking Trevor's face echoes through the high ceilings of the ballroom like a physical thunderclap. The force of the blow snaps Trevor's head to the side, knocking his expensive designer glasses clean off his face. They slide across the polished marble, shattering against the base of a nearby cocktail table. Jasmine does not stop. She screams at him, a raw, screeching sound that rips through the elegant, silent ballroom, entirely obliterating any remaining shred of decorum. She yells his name over and over, her voice cracking with a terrifying mixture of absolute humiliation and visceral rage. She demands to know how he could do this to her, how he could take the money they were supposed to use to buy their dream home and spend it on a 24-year-old assistant. She throws the names of the luxury items back in his face, shrieking about the Midtown high-rise, the Range Rover, and the Cartier bracelet. To Jasmine, the betrayal is horrific, but the public execution of her pride in front of the Atlanta elite is an unforgivable death blow. She growls that he has turned her into a laughingstock, that every single woman in her social circle is currently watching her perfect life get dragged through the mud. She grabs Trevor by the lapels of his tailored suit, aggressively shaking him, demanding he look at her while she unloads a decade of repressed venom. Trevor can barely find his voice. He stammers out broken, pathetic excuses, his hands trembling as he tries to shield his face from her relentless assault. He weeps his mucus, and tears smearing across his expensive collar, completely stripping him of any corporate privilege or dignity. He stutters that he was desperate, that his gambling debts had entirely backed him into a corner, and that the assistant was nothing more than a temporary distraction from the crushing weight of his financial failure. He tries to reach for Jasmine's waist, begging her to remember their unborn child, begging her to keep this private so they can handle it behind closed doors. But his pathetic groveling only fuels her rage. Jasmine kicks his hand away, screaming that he is a disgusting, parasitic liar who used her family to fund his degenerate double life. While the golden child and her corporate prince are violently tearing each other to pieces on the floor, the camera begins a slow, deliberate dolly out. The frame gradually widens, pushing backward with a smooth mechanical precision. The movement slowly expands the space, pulling away from the screeching chaos in the center of the VIP lounge. As the lens recedes, I am brought into sharp, pristine focus on the left side of the frame. I am completely stationary, my posture effortlessly elegant, as I lean back against the marble counter. I raise my crystal glass, tilting it slightly to watch the deep red wine swirl against the glass before taking a slow, incredibly comfortable sip. The visual contrast is stark and absolute. On the right side of the frame, a family is completely incinerating itself in a wild, blurred tempest of screams and violence. On the left side, I am a portrait of total, unbothered peace, entirely separated from the toxicity of the people who shared my DNA. My mother, Beatrice, remains completely frozen just a few feet away from the brawling couple. The absolute shock of the revelation has turned her into a living statue. She stands there, her hands still locked onto her designer clutch so tightly that her knuckles are completely white. Her mouth is slightly open, her eyes wide and hollow as she watches her entire universe turn into a cheap, undignified public circus. For decades, Beatrice lived for one single thing, the perception of absolute perfection. She built her entire identity on being the supreme matriarch of a wealthy elite dynasty. She spent my money to buy the envy of the high society women currently watching her family implode. Now her prized son-in-law is exposed as a gambling thief on his knees, and her golden daughter is screaming obscenities in the middle of a charity gala. The pristine, aristocratic illusion has been violently stripped away, leaving nothing but the raw, thieving ugliness of the parasites she nurtured. Beatrice tries to intervene, her voice emerging as a weak, desperate gasp before she can muster any authority. She commands Jasmine to stop screaming frantically, whispering that everyone is watching, that the church leaders and the country club board members are standing right behind the velvet ropes. She reaches out to pull Jasmine back, desperately attempting to preserve a single shred of family deniability. But Jasmine is completely beyond my mother's control. She turns her blinding rage directly onto Beatrice, shoving her hand away with a vicious, disrespectful snap. Jasmine shrieks at our mother, loudly accusing her of forcing Trevor into her life, blaming Beatrice's relentless obsession with status for pushing her into a marriage built entirely on a mirage. Jasmine yells that Beatrice wanted a trophy son-in-law so badly that she never bothered to check if he was a criminal, completely breaking the sacred rule of their toxic alliance. The hypocrisy of the family has officially turned inward, becoming a self-consuming monster that is rapidly devouring itself. They are no longer a united front allied against my independence. They are three desperate, exposed grifters trapped in a room full of the very people they lied to, violently clawing at each other's throats to deflect the blame of their own spectacular failure. My mother is weeping now, real ugly tears of social devastation, realizing that her grand, untouchable reputation in the city of Atlanta has been permanently and thoroughly slaughtered. The slow dolly out continues expanding the frame until the brawling trio becomes a distant, frantic spectacle in the background, muffled by the rising murmur of the shocked ballroom. The high society guests are no longer hiding their reactions. They are openly staring, pointing their phones and whispering behind their hands with absolute revulsion. The great Beatrice Anderson and her perfect children are completely undone. I take one more deliberate sip of my wine, looking directly into the widening lens of the camera, completely detached, completely free. I let them tear each other apart in the ruins of the empire I built, because the host is finally empty, and the parasites have nothing left to consume but themselves. The complete collapse of a grand illusion is always accompanied by the absolute chaotic desperation of the people who created it. My mother Beatrice stands frozen in the center of the VIP lounge at the Heritage Endowment Gala. Her eyes dart frantically around the room. She looks at the prominent women from her elite sorority chapter, the influential church leaders, and the high society matriarchs who are now standing behind the velvet ropes, whispering behind their manicured hands. The regal aristocratic mask she had glued to her face for the past 10 years, using my hard-earned money, has completely melted into a pathetic, humiliating puddle under the brilliant crystal chandeliers. When she looks down and sees her prized son-in-law Trevor crawling on the floor to gather his gambling debts and proof of infidelity, and watches her golden daughter Jasmine screaming like a deranged lunatic, she finally understands that her empire has been entirely erased. And the most agonizing part for her is that it happened right in front of the exact Atlanta elite she spent her entire life bowing down to impress. She can no longer maintain her fake elegance. Beatrice lunges toward me, her hands weighed down by the cubic zirconia rings she always pretended were real diamonds claw desperately at the hem of my emerald silk gown. Her voice breaks completely. It is no longer the sharp, commanding tone of a matriarch. It is the pathetic, high-pitched begging of a cornered fraud. She gasps her breath, ragged, pleading with me to please make this stop. She begs me to consider what everyone is looking at. She asks me what will happen to the family reputation if this scandal hits the local society papers tomorrow morning. She tells me I am a director at a massive private equity firm in New York, that I have millions of dollars, and that this tiny amount of money is absolutely nothing to me. She begs me to tell the event manager that the banking system simply made an error. She begs me to tell the crowd that this is all just a terrible, unfortunate misunderstanding. She promises me that I can just pay off Trevor's debts quietly and reinstate the guarantor contract for Jasmine's house. She claims we are family, that blood is thicker than water, and that I cannot possibly be this cruel to my own flesh and blood. I stand perfectly still. I look down at the woman groveling at my feet with absolute untouchable tranquility. Family reputation. To the very bitter end, the only thing she actually cares about is her fragile, superficial vanity in front of strangers. She does not feel a single ounce of genuine sympathy for Jasmine discovering her husband's infidelity. She does not offer a single word of reprimand to Trevor for acting as a parasite and stealing from the family accounts for 3 years. The only thing she fears, the only thing that forces her to physically lower herself and beg the daughter she has always despised, is the terrifying reality of high society, finding out she is completely broke and living on secret charity. I slowly, deliberately peel her trembling fingers off my silk gown. I take one measured step backward, maintaining the exact physical distance required to avoid being stained by her sheer desperation. I look up, making sure the captivated audience watching us can hear every single word I say. I ask her what family reputation she is actually talking about. I ask if she means the reputation built entirely on my 80-hour work weeks in Manhattan. I ask if she means the reputation funded by the years I spent living in cramped studio apartments in my early 20s, skipping meals and hoarding my bonuses just so I could wire money back to Atlanta to pay for her Caribbean vacations and Jasmine's designer wardrobe. I tell her she never considered me family when she was swiping my platinum cards to buy her friends expensive lunches while simultaneously mocking my single status. I tell her she only remembers that we share blood when her wallet is entirely empty and she needs me to fund her delusions. Jasmine hears my words over her own hysterical sobbing. The agonizing pain of her husband's betrayal instantly morphs into a blinding, irrational rage directed entirely at me. She scrambles to her feet. Her voluminous hair is a tangled mess, and her expensive mascara is smeared in thick, dark streaks across her cheeks. She points a shaking finger directly at my chest, screaming at the top of her lungs with total helpless fury. She accuses me of being a cold-blooded monster. She claims I knew about the bankruptcy, the embezzlement, and the cheating the entire time. She screams that I secretly hired private investigators and forensic auditors, just waiting for the perfect moment to completely destroy her. She yells that I am jealous of her, that I want to leave her with nothing, and that I deliberately plan to steal her $2 million dream mansion. I look at my mother's beloved golden child. The smile on my face grows wider, radiating a sense of absolute, irreversible victory. I tell Jasmine that her $2 million dream mansion never actually existed. It was nothing but a castle made of sand built on the arrogant delusions of her gambling-addicted husband and the blind, enabling ignorance of our mother. I tell her that I did not steal anything because you cannot steal what was never real. And then I look back at Beatrice delivering the final, catastrophic shockwave that will permanently bury her. I reach into my emerald clutch one last time. I pull out a single crisp legal document bearing the bright red stamp of a Supreme Court notary. I hold it up. I announce that the sprawling 5-bedroom house with the heated pool that my mother currently lives in, the house she uses to host her elite sorority gatherings, is legally owned by my asset management firm. I established that ownership 8 years ago, when I quietly bought it out of my grandfather's foreclosure. I state that last night simultaneously, with the dissolution of the fake Anderson Family Trust, I officially signed the contract to sell that entire property to a commercial development conglomerate. They are scheduled to bulldoze the house and the pristine lawn next month to build a corporate office complex. I look my mother dead in the eye and deliver the final terms of her new reality. I tell her that she, Jasmine, and her criminal husband have exactly 30 days to pack up their designer clothes, their monogrammed luggage, and get out. The deadline is 30 days without a single second of extension. When that clock expires, the development group's private security force will physically evict anyone remaining on my property. Trevor collapses entirely onto the floor, the scattered audit papers and casino receipts surrounding him like trash. He has not only lost the $2 million mansion, but he has just been evicted from his only remaining safety net. Jasmine falls to her knees right next to him, choking on the bitter, humiliating realization that she has absolutely no money, no home, and a husband who is facing a potential 5-year prison sentence for wire fraud and forgery. My mother is completely annihilated. She slumps backward onto the velvet sofa, both hands covering her rapidly aging face. The elite friends she spent years trying to impress, the women who once praised her as the ultimate symbol of Black excellence, are actively turning their backs and walking away in utter disgust. Not a single person stays to comfort her. Not a single hand reaches out to help. Her imaginary kingdom has been entirely reduced to dust. At this exact moment, the visual narrative shifts permanently. A flawless, stabilizing tracking shot begins. The camera locks onto my movements as I turn away from the carnage. The emerald silk of my gown trails smoothly across the marble floor. I do not look back at the wreckage behind me. I do not listen to Jasmine's pathetic wailing or my mother's hollow, desperate pleading. I walk with absolute, unbothered pride directly toward the grand glass doors leading out to the ballroom's expansive private balcony. As I push through the heavy glass doors and step out into the cool night air, the entire visual space becomes brilliantly illuminated. The golden lights of the city skyline reflect against the dark, vast sky, creating a breathtaking, majestic atmosphere. All the suffocating toxicity, all the screaming, and all the parasitic energy of the people inside are completely left behind in the shadows. The camera, which has been in constant motion throughout the entire ordeal, finally comes to a complete deliberate stop. It locks into the first and only static shot of the entire narrative. The stillness of the frame symbolizes my absolute unshakable balance and the undeniable power of my position. I stand leaning casually against the sleek glass railing, the night breeze gently catching my hair. I turn my head slowly, looking directly into the stationary lens with a bright, effortless, and entirely liberated smile. I deliver my final farewell, my voice soft, smooth, and laced with absolute finality. I say, "My mother texted me. You are cut off. Do not contact this family again. I have always been a very obedient daughter. I wish you and Jasmine a highly memorable 30 days. Good luck." My smile freezes in the perfectly still frame, radiating total emancipation from the psychological chains of their manipulation and the heavy burden of toxic bloodlines. I returned every single ounce of cruelty they deserved, and I took my entire life back. The screen slowly fades to black. The most profound takeaway from this story is that shared DNA does not grant anyone a free pass to exploit, belittle, or manipulate you. For years, Nia endured severe emotional abuse and financial parasitism under the toxic guise of family duty. Society often conditions us to believe that we must endlessly tolerate disrespect simply because it comes from blood relatives, but this narrative is deeply damaging. True empowerment begins the moment you recognize your own worth and establish ironclad boundaries. You are never obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. This journey teaches us that ultimate success is not just about accumulating wealth or climbing the corporate ladder. It is about reclaiming your peace and absolutely refusing to finance your own disrespect. Cutting ties with abusive family members is not an act of cruelty or bitterness. It is the highest form of self-preservation and self-respect. Sometimes, the healthiest choice you can possibly make is to walk away from environments that constantly demand your sacrifice without ever offering genuine love in return. Your peace of mind is your most valuable asset, so protect it fiercely. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe in protecting your peace, and share this video with someone who needs the courage to confidently set their own boundaries today.